Dear friends, welcome to the Priest Podcast, sponsored by the Napa Institute. You may not know it, but one of Napa's most meaningful efforts involves the formation and support of priests and religious. We have become fascinated by the stories of our clergy. Through this podcast, we want to bring you some of these amazing stories too, but in a way that is unique, priests interviewing other priests from all walks of life and backgrounds. We think this series will be a great resource for everyone, those considering the priesthood, as well as those in active ministry who may be struggling or just looking for good ideas. But even the laity will benefit by learning more about the needs and thoughts of the clergy as we consider how to support and pray for them, given all they do for us. So sit back and enjoy this glimpse into the life and work of the priest. In today's episode, Father Michael Duffy will interview Father Eric Cadin, fellow host.
Hello everyone, my name is Father Michael Duffy, a priest of the Diocese of Rockville Centre, Long Island, New York. I'm today's host for the Shepherd Circle podcast produced by the Napa Institute. I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast today Father Eric Cadin, a priest of the Archdiocese of Boston and Vocations Director there. He was ordained a priest in 2012, actually the same year as I was, and has since served in many different assignments until this current long tenure as Vocations Director there. I'm excited to hear him speak about his priestly experiences. Father Eric, welcome to the Shepherd Circle podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be able to speak of the great things God is doing.
That's fantastic.
How wonderful it is to be a priest.
Father Eric, I'm a priest of the Diocese of Rockville Centre. We recently just sent you a gift from Long Island via Providence, a new Archbishop. How is Archbishop Henning?
That is correct. It is probably the most wonderful gift you could have given us. So certainly as a priest of Boston, but also as a vocation director, it is such a blessing to have such a good and holy man and priest and bishop who loves the church and Jesus Christ and being a priest.
Right.
And we notice it immediately, and the men with whom I have the privilege of working with respect to vocations are noticing it as well. And so it is such a blessing. We are very grateful to the people of Rockville Centre and of Providence.
So we formed him. He formed us. He was in seminary formation. He actually preached at my first Mass because he was one of my seminary formators. We became really close. So we formed him. He formed us. And now we sent him up via Providence to you guys. We're really proud of Richard, the Archbishop of Boston. It's an exciting moment for your Archdiocese. Tell me, you're in vocations ministry. Are you seeing an impact? I mean, it's early days, but of having a new Archbishop?
Well, we've had the real blessing in Boston for certainly almost 20 years of having a really healthy stream of wonderful and faithful and courageous men, hearing that call from Jesus Christ and responding with a boldness and a courage to that. And so I've been in vocation work for about 10 years.
Oh, wow.
I began as an assistant vocation director for 5, and my predecessor did an extraordinary job. Father Dan Hennessy had been in the office for, I think, close to 15 years. Oh, wow. And so we have a lot of stability in Boston. And during that time, he, working with then Cardinal O'Malley, had really set up a very healthy outreach and invitation. In Boston, we have the real opportunity of so many young people across nearly 70 colleges and universities. One of my side jobs is the director of university ministries. So I would be a liaison between the Archdiocese and the different universities, their administrations, the chaplaincies there. And so there are nearly 341,000 students within our Archdiocese in higher education. Wow. So there's an extraordinary pool to draw from, and just the witness of first Cardinal O'Malley and now Archbishop Henning has shown a real attractive and captivating example of priestly life, of men who love the priesthood and who love bringing the sacraments, bringing grace and mercy, not only into the world, but into people's lives. And I think particularly among the men with whom I work, there's always, but now especially, a real desire for meaning and purpose and to offer one's life in a heroic way. Right. And in the priesthood, I know of no other or no greater way to do that than to be a Catholic priest, right. Especially a parish priest.
Exactly. You know, Father, I think one of the goals of the Shepherd Circle podcast that you're going to be helping us host, we're going to be taking turns with these hosting duties, is to share the beauty of the priesthood. As a vocation director, you know firsthand how important it is to display to other young men especially how the Holy Spirit has worked in our own lives. So hoping that this podcast can do that, tell us a little bit about your own vocation journey, your own story.
Yeah, so I grew up just south of Boston in a very blue-collar, working-class town, very Irish Catholic in particular. You know, my town of Weymouth had, at the time, about 50,000 people and 5 Catholic churches. Wow. And I think at the time, 3 Catholic schools. And so we would joke if you went to public school, it meant your parents didn't love you because the schools were so prevalent and affordable, especially at that time. So I grew up in my local parish and going to the Catholic school as all my siblings did. At the time, too, we still had some really wonderful religious sisters who just provided a really great example. And now I can't say I thought too much about the priesthood growing up, nor was the faith the most important thing to me. But it was deep within my family, in just the culture in which I grew up, so that religious sisters and priests were a familiar thing. It was certainly not an anomaly, or there was a normalization. So, as I grew, I had different aspirations for kinds of jobs or vocation in the broadest sense. Except I do remember, and I have these distinct memories, being a little boy, maybe 7, and wondering when asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? I remember not knowing exactly, except I knew that I wanted to love greatly in just a big and bold and extraordinary way, not in an ordinary way. And I had no idea what that meant. What does a 7-year-old boy think about these things? Except I knew that. And, of course, and I can touch on it a little bit, now I see, as a priest, that's exactly what I do, because we have the privilege of being the instrument in our own humanity of the Father's love for his children. Yeah. That the Lord works through our hearts. We're not puppets or just tools, but we're instruments in our humanity. And so my heart is what the Lord uses to eternally, and particularly and just personally, love all but each of his children that in that moment he's entrusting to me.
I mean, isn't that the gift of celibacy that for so many people is a stumbling block, but it's precisely the gift of celibacy that enables us to love with an undivided heart?
Oh, absolutely. Especially as a vocation director, I get all kinds of questions, but also, just as an aside, it's one of the greatest blessings of the work I have the privilege of doing is seeing first how present God is in the diocese I serve, in working in the lives of so many young people. Right. And sometimes in the busyness of maybe parish life and all kinds of being occupied with all sorts of things, it's not as visible perhaps, but that's all I deal with. Right. And so it's a position where you're just filled with a lot of hope, intangible hope, just obvious. I can point to people, and so having that experience, and also being able to see how in these young people, this movement of grace, and it's just remarkable.
Right. So what did you do? When did you actually start really getting into the idea of priesthood? Where did it come?
So I think broadly we could say I went through a very selfish phase, and because I had in my heart a longing for greatness, right, and to do extraordinary things, and I wasn't quite sure of how you do that, in an ordered and holy way. It was okay if I want to be important and acknowledged, then I have to be successful, and I started to look to the world to how you do that, and which is funny. It's an expression people use. I look to the world. What does that mean? I think it means, the athletes, celebrities, social media. And it certainly gives a message. And, and I just had heard that you needed to be successful in academics and athletics and just popularity. And so I just started to pursue those. And I remember a really distinct moment. I was a sophomore at Harvard, and I was an athlete and playing on a sports team there, and starting too as a sophomore, which was really a pride for me. But then I was a member of one of the finals clubs, which are these sort of real snobby, like a Harvard snobby version of a fraternity. And we were having a party, and I remember for the first time looking around, and there were some not so great things happening around me, and just recognizing, where is the happy? I remember thinking that I was promised, again, by whom? The universe, what people say, that if I achieved these things, I would be happy. And I think I had done fairly well in them. But I realized I wasn't. There were moments of pleasure or a kind of fleeting happiness that just comes and goes, but not a lasting joy and peace that we all want, that our hearts are made for. And I remember looking around at all my friends who were extraordinarily accomplished and recognizing no one had it. And so I had an inspiration that night. So it was a big night for me. And I know now, of course, in hindsight, that this was the fruit of all of those people, especially my grandmothers and the Blessed Mother Mary, because she's the best, who had been praying for me. And I just had this simple thought of, well, maybe my faith has some alternative. Because growing up, the faith was important, but it wasn't formative in the deepest sense. I always went to Mass because that's what we would do. And I remember, too, even throughout my life, that because of that familiarity, the church and the Catholic Church, whenever I traveled, always felt like home. And now, I didn't interiorize it necessarily, but even I would travel to Australia, these other places, and each time I would go, if I felt homesick, I knew any Catholic church I walked into, there was a deep sense of, I'm home in some way. And so I thought I have nothing to lose, so I went and joined a Bible study, and it was incredible. The first thing I discovered was, whoa, our faith is extraordinary. It's deep, and it's engaging, and it's worth thinking about and thinking about well. It's not just the kind of streamers and balloons. And I was a big nerd at the time, so I really got into it. Yeah. And then what was even more interesting was the fellow who led my Bible study, Ben. He was a classmate of mine. And he was really fun to be around. He wasn't sort of odd or weird, which can happen in these scenarios. But I noticed he had an incredible peace and joy about him. And it was so captivating and attractive. And so I went up to him one day and I said, Ben, and he said, what? And I said, what do you have? Because that's what I want. That's what I've been looking for. And he said, it's Jesus. And I said, huh? Well, he's from Texas, so they speak like this. In New England, we don't always use this kind of language. And then he said, I know that my Father in heaven loves me, and that I'm his son. And I remember thinking, I understand those words, but I don't know what he's talking about. What does it mean? And so for the next year or so, he kind of mentored me. Churchy language, he discipled me. But he just taught me how to pray. And, which is wild, that the creator of the universe, the one who made everything that is good and beautiful and bold and adventurous, knows me and you and desires a real relationship with us. And that what happens at Mass, that the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, the moment in all eternity when he said, this is what you're worth, everything that you're worth dying for, is made present. And as I began to not only know that, but recognize that in a deeply personal way with God, I came to realize this is the greatest thing in the whole world. Because we all are desiring that, to know that we are known and acknowledged and loved. And I just become convinced through my own experience, and now as a priest, that one of the great lies that we hear and believe is that our value, your worth, your dignity, your identity is contingent. It depends on what you have or what you don't have, what you can do or can't do, what you look like or don't look like. And it's exhausting, and it never ends. And then suddenly I'm hearing not the lie, but the truth, that God knows, desires, and loves me, and that by my baptism, I am his son. not for anything I can do, because most of us are baptized as babies. What do? We like eat and poop and sleep, and maybe we're adorable, maybe we're not. But in the kind of modern sense, we're not contributing to society in that moment. We're just received. And the more I recognized that, I thought, this is what everyone in the world, without exception, longs for, because this is the heart of the Father for them. And so I thought, well, this faith, this is the most important thing. And there's nothing even second that's close. And so I figured, well, this is the industry I want to get into. and being at Harvard, I'm like, oh, I want to do it well, so I should be a priest. And there you go.
So how old were you when you actually entered the seminary?
So I had graduated. Yeah. And then I did have a little hiatus. I spent a year in Hawaii surfing. And then I entered the seminary. I just wanted some beauty.
Quite the gap year, yeah.
Well, I think, respectfully, I try to acknowledge this. I think sort of after college, it's not so much a gap year as maybe I was being more of a bum.
Right. Get it out of your system now, Father.
Right. Yeah. But that was what was interesting is one of the things that, especially as I've grown in my priesthood, and in particular work I'm doing of working with these incredible men, of seeing how much the Father, first of all, loves me and loves you, but answers and responds to, like works in and transforms the humanity of the men before him. Because, you mentioned at the beginning, talking about celibacy, and I said all these men have different questions and concerns. And, I'm convinced, more than we're even sitting here before these microphones, that the Father in heaven loves me and loves you even more than I can imagine. And he knows exactly how I'm made, just as he knows exactly how you are made. And when he invites us to follow him in our vocation, down this path, he knows how we're made, and he responds to us, and he provides for us. Which is why when I reflect upon my life as like that little boy, as I said earlier, I get to do exactly what I didn't have words for, or sort of a grammar or an understanding of. But that's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. And, because I've always been a kind of adventure type, and it's funny because, there was a part of me that my little hiatus of going to Hawaii for a year was a little bit of that, was a little bit of like, well, I need one more big adventure.
Right.
Not oblivious, but maybe a little ignorant of really how loving the Father is, and how particular it is. Because following after him, particularly in the vocation to priesthood, is the most extraordinary adventure I could ever imagine, which makes it easy to talk with young men, because I'm like, this will open up a world and an adventure and a greatness in your own humanity that is beyond anything you could ever imagine.
So, Father, you went to Hawaii for the year, got all that out of your system, not realizing that what would be in store for you. Came back, and where'd you go to seminary?
So we have a seminary in Boston, which is an incredible blessing, particularly for my work, because being able to bring men who are thinking about the priesthood to meet lots of seminarians, and to meet a place where men are formed, it helps to familiarize. Sure. Just as when I was a kid and there were just always priests around and religious sisters, it wasn't an odd thing.
It takes the fear factor away, right?
Absolutely. And so more and more, young men where maybe there's fewer priests in the diocese they might be in, or they don't have as much exposure to seminarians, it can feel like the most important question and challenge and significant thing ever. But if you know a lot of seminarians and priests, you recognize that they're human too, like me.
They were able to make that decision. I can too.
I can too. And that each day is another step along that process. So at St. John's, which was great, I did all of my seminary studies there and had just extraordinary faculty and priest witnesses and examples, and great rectors, and so I think they formed me well, I hope.
So you were ordained in 2012, June of 2012. Tell me about your first assignment. What was that like?
My first assignment was wonderful. I'd always heard priests, a lot of priests anyway, mention how their first assignment in some ways is sort of their first love. And I'll tell you, my first parish was St. Michael's in North Andover, which is a little north of Boston. And I love that parish and those people, even to this day. Right. Like, how can you not? Right. And it's one of the larger if not the largest parish in our Archdiocese, because it's the only parish in a town, and so we have a lot of churches. And so this is the only church in this growing town. And there were 3 priests assigned there, a pastor and myself and another parochial vicar. And it was an extraordinary school with 500 or 600 students. I know you have a school at the cathedral, and that's such a joy. Right. I would go almost every day and walk around the school, visit the classes, and it was so fantastic to see, the hope, the joy of all these children, these wonderful teachers who would welcome me and the other priests in.
I often say, if you're having a bad day, just walk through the kindergarten hallway. Go sit in a kindergarten classroom, right? Those kids will wake you right up.
In each year, what I would do is I would have a particular focus on the 8th graders, which meant even, I think I would teach a class maybe every other week in the religion. And I never having been a teacher, one of my memories was I really had and grew in a great affection for this class. Right. And, I got to know each one, personally and well, which again speaks to the heart of the Father in us, where I could, in the most extraordinary way, have affection and love personally for all of them, desire their good, the best for them. And so, teachers deal with this all the time, and I was so new to it that when they graduated, I had this moment of, it was almost a moment of terror where I thought, wait a minute, they're leaving? And I said, what do you mean they're leaving? Yeah. Like next year they're not going to be here?
You've invested so much into them, of yourself.
It was like my heart broke. Yeah. And I said to the teachers, you deal with this every year? Yeah. And they said, yes. I said, how do you do this? Right. How can I care about the next class as much as them? Right. Turns out you can. Yeah. And so, to this day, a few of those students, I've done their weddings and things. And so I just had 3 incredible years there that taught me how beautiful it is to be present, the real gift of the fatherhood of the priest, and most importantly, the faithfulness of God. 2 simple examples. One night I was praying. So the church is fairly large and it has sort of side sections, and so I was off in one section, and it was about 8 o'clock at night, and in a real blessing, the church was always open. I think the doors locked at maybe 10 o'clock at night or something. Right. And so it really was a house of prayer. Yeah. So people would come in and out. And so I'm up in the corner, I think I was praying Vespers, evening prayer. And I noticed this older couple came in. And, not being oblivious, I recognized they seemed to be a little distressed. And so they came down and they knelt before the sanctuary, and they really looked like in a lot of pain. So I'm kind of scared. They don't see me at all, and because I'm kind of in the corner. Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, a few minutes go by, and so I slowly make my way down. I make myself known, so not to spook them. And when they were sharing with me that they had just gotten this devastating diagnosis of, I believe it was sort of a stage 4 sort of terminal cancer, and they didn't know what to do. And so the first thing they could think to do was to go to church, to go home, and to bring this moment with all the emotions attached to Jesus. And I happen to be there. And I say that because the Father in heaven loves them so much, and he's so faithful, that his faithfulness isn't abstract. This is one of the great blessings of the priesthood. God doesn't love us generically, or in kind of obscure ways, but so personally, and particularly and sacramentally, like through our hands and our voice, our humanity. And so in that moment, the Father knew his daughter was suffering. And so he sent me. And I went and we prayed, and we didn't pray in the way that sometimes people do, which I'm not a big fan of, which is a version of, well, God, maybe if there's the possibility that you would pay attention, I know you're busy, but and I'm not that important, and there's a lot of important things in the world, but if maybe you just had a moment, you could think about blessing me, but if you don't, it's okay. And I don't like to pray like that. And because the Lord brought healing. He desires real healing in people's lives. And so we prayed with confidence, as children would do, to their father in desperation. And we prayed for a miracle. And I think it was about 2 weeks later, she came back and her cancer was gone.
Holy cow.
And so every year, I send out a lot of Christmas cards. And every year it gets returned from them and they remember that moment.
Wow. How could they not? My goodness, yeah.
But it was a moment of how faithful God is in his promises. And that is, when I talk to these young men about the priesthood, what an awesome privilege that is, to be the instrument that the Father uses to show his faithfulness in the world. And, in one other example, as a priest, the faithfulness that God showed to me, priests have the most wonderful stories of how present God is. And, it's such a blessing. Like, how could we not believe all this? And so early on, there was a family I got to know, and they have 4 children. And the youngest 2 are twins. And the boy was very sick. He's born with a mitochondrial disease, which, if we're scientists or not, means sort of his cells were attacking themselves. Oh, wow. And so he was in and out of the hospital growing up. And his siblings were very athletic, but he couldn't really play sports, and he was just a great fan. And at this time, when I met him, he was 6, turning 7, which is that time of First Communion. Right. And this little boy loved Jesus. He suffered a lot. And in the summers, for example, he would leave the town we were in and go towards the coast, where his grandparents had a house by the beach. And there's a summer chapel, which I'm sure on Long Island these things exist too. And the pastor of that parish, was a really good priest, had given his grandparents a key to the chapel, because this little boy at 5, 6 years old would almost every day want to go into that chapel. And people would ask him, like, why do you want to visit the chapel? And he said, well, that's where Jesus is, and I just want to be with him. I mean, so that's incredible and extraordinary. So, he'd gotten pretty sick, and so I went into the hospital and was able to give him his first communion before his sister and confirm him, because it was sort of, touch and go. And I told him, you're taking the shortcut. Your sister's going to have to wait. At that time, in our diocese, it would be in 10th grade.
Yeah.
And, we all kind of laughed over it. But then, maybe 3 or 4 days later, he'd had a seizure in the middle of the night and had lost oxygen to the brain and was just put on a ventilator, and it really was in the process of dying. And the parents were just in anguish. I mean, this is their 7-year-old son. And so the grandparents and the siblings had all come in to basically say goodbye. Right. And then they called me up and they said, we want you to come down, and will you be in the room with us when he's removed from the ventilator? And I remember, of course, I said, yes, of course. But meanwhile, inside, I'm like, well, what, you think, what am I supposed to do? Right. There's not a book that says, okay, if parents are going to be present for the death of their child, just say these 2 things and everything will be okay.
If only that existed.
And so, I said yes. And I remember I drove down to Children's Hospital in Boston, and the whole drive, I'm just begging the Lord, like, I don't know what to do.
Give me something.
Yeah. I said, Lord, this is what I can do. I'm pretty sure I can walk into the room. But you need to do everything else. And so you have to show up, because I don't know what to do in this situation. So I park and I go into the room, and I did have I had one of the books, and so I had a little cheat code. And so we get in there and start formal prayers and anointing and sort of apostolic pardon. And one of the things I'd always done with him when I would visit in the past, when I would pray with him or other people who are sick, I'd often like to say, I don't want you to do anything. I don't want you to try hard, because we feel like we have to earn it or something. I said, just receive. There's so much grace and healing the Lord wants to give. I just want you to receive it. And so I'd always said this to this young man. And so I do these formal prayers, and I'm like, okay, that wasn't so bad. And then the dad says to me, but Father, can we do one more prayer? And I'm like, of course. And he said, can we pray that somehow my wife and I and our kids can make it through this? And I'm like, okay. And then God showed up. I mean, it's the only way to describe it. Is all of a sudden, I started some kind of formal thing, and then I stopped and said, wait a minute. And then I just started talking directly to him. Because even though he's unconscious, his soul is there. His guardian angel is there. And I remember speaking directly to him, saying, Matthew, every time we've been together, I always ask you not to do anything, just to receive. And I said, at this moment, though, I do have something I want you to do. I said, in a few moments, you're going to see and be with Jesus, who you love. And I want you, when you do that, to ask him to take care of your mom and your dad and your sisters and your brother. And, and it was just, it was so intimate and beautiful. And then, the parents got into the bed with him, and so I was like, okay, I knelt down at the foot and said, I'll just go pray the rosary as the doctors came in. And so it was just the four of us in the room. And so little Matthew made it to the fourth joyful mystery, the presentation in the temple. And that's when his little heart stopped. Yeah. And, and I share that, I still have such an eternal memory of it because of how faithful God is.
Those things don't leave us, right? Throughout our priesthoods. And when we can do that for strangers or for people that come into our lives as parishioners, we get called to the hospital, we get for random people, and then there are people that we know, and then there are our own family members. That doesn't leave, right? It leaves an imprint on our hearts because the Lord has given us a heart to love, right?
Of course.
And to be touched by, and that's a gift that you have a little guy praying for you in heaven, right? Oh, yeah. No wonder you're such a successful vocation director,
And the thing that I'm always awed by is how risky and bold the Father is, that he desires and uses our humanity to love his people. Right. Because, it's a common thing, we recognize that God doesn't need us. Right. He could do everything, right, but he chooses to bring us, to invite us, to bring us into his work, into his saving mission and work in the world. And he does it, again, as I said earlier, not making us puppets or marionettes on strings or something, right, but with our minds, our intellects, our hearts.
You weren't a sacramental robot in that moment. Right. You brought your humanity into that room, and your heart broke for that family and for that little boy in that moment, and your raw emotion touched their hearts, right? Like, right, you were one with them. You were his spiritual father in that moment, and when you see your spiritual children suffering, it hurts, right? And so there's a part of our priesthood that is, it's so impacted by those relationships, right? And it's a what does St. John Paul II say? It's a gift and mystery, right?
Absolutely, it is, and it is a gift and mystery, and it's we have this, again, awesome privilege of letting, to continue to go back, because I'm always thinking about these things and talking to the young men, our life is full of love and relationship. Right. We're neither lonely nor loveless, right, but we are fully engaged. And I think one of the elements of that mystery and that gift is in those moments where the Lord is working through us, but we're also experiencing, in just a little way, the depth of the Father's love, right, for his child then. Right. And that continues to forge and to shape the priestly heart. Right. It's true. It's why we're most properly called Father, because we are in the place of the Father in heaven, loving his children in that moment. And that's what we all are hungry for and desire and need, because it's the way he made us. Right. And why I say it's sort of risky is, that God says, I call you, and any young man listening, I call you to be the vessel, in your humanity that I'm going to use to sanctify, to heal, to save the universe, in my children. There's no greater adventure than that. It's even better than any kind of superhero.
And so how do we not extend that invitation to other young men to consider whether or not God wants them to be a priest? So fast forward to your job right now. You're the Vocations Director of the Archdiocese of Boston. You have some 300,000 college kids in your Archdiocese. How is it going? How are vocations right now?
They're going really well. It's we've been, as I said, really blessed with not only stability, but incredibly generous bishops, from Cardinal Sean O'Malley to now Archbishop Henning, who are obviously, as I said before, in love with the people and love being priests. And, the way you just phrased it, I think is exactly right. Like, I want this for all of the men whom God is calling, and I want them to know how extraordinary it is. And one of the great blessings of having first Cardinal O'Malley, now Archbishop Henning, is their love is manifest. So we had, for example, a St. Andrew's dinner. So a lot of dioceses will do this, and it's typically we aim it towards high school young men, and we bring them to the seminary, and we have a night with dinner, evening prayer, and then conversation with the bishop. And it's funny, with Archbishop Henning, I said, okay, you can give a little talk. And this was his first one with us, so I just kind of trial by fire. Yep. And he was great. And so he can give a little talk, and then we'll have a Q&A. I said, but, you might know this demographic, Q&A, they tend to be pretty quiet. Yep. I said, so I'll have some questions planted. And he said, that's fine. And I'll tell you, he gave his presentation, which was excellent. And then it opened up for questions. And immediately, his responses manifested a real authenticity in humanity that was relational to the Lord and was so inviting that the young men just started asking questions. Wow. Because they felt immediately comfortable. Here was a shepherd and a father, a priest, bishop, who is in love with the Lord in a human way. Not in a kind of, okay, I just have every answer and I'm just going to kind of give a stock response, but with an honesty, like a simple question, do you understand everything with the faith or something like that? And he's like, well, no, certainly. The mystery of our faith is so deep. And he said, but I know Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so even if I don't fully understand something, I trust him. Right. And I, through that trust, I come to learn more and deepen. And this coming from, the Archbishop of our diocese. And that every man's eyes were open. It was like, ooh, because they have questions or concerns. They don't fully understand and everything.
Kids especially, high school boys, they could smell a phony a mile away, right? And so what do they look for? They look for sincerity. Right. And when we're discerning the priesthood, they're looking for men that are in love with their vocations, right? That are in love with the person of Jesus Christ. And you can't fake that. Right?
No, you can't. And you can see in not only his answers or, the great priests I work with as well, who just produce vocations, it's because they have a depth of relationship with the Lord that's honest in their humanity. And it becomes attractive. Yeah. They obviously aspire for a greatness, like a boldness in proclaiming the gospel and bringing healing and mercy and grace and salvation into the world, of being able to confect the Eucharist and hear confessions to release people from the weight of their sins that fuels a lie that you're worthless. How often do we hear this just repetitive, like demonic voice telling us, maybe you pretend to be good, but this is who you really are, prideful or lustful or angry or whatever it is. That defines you. Yeah, and you bring it to the Lord in the sacrament of confession. And every single time, no matter what it is, he says to you, I forgive you. And, when he says it through your voice, which is so that young man or young woman or older man, older woman can hear with their ears so tangibly, I'm forgiven. So when that lie comes, they say, no. Right. I don't believe it. Yeah. I don't believe it because I've heard that I'm forgiven.
So Pope Benedict had that great quote of saying, you are not the sum of your sins, you are the sum of the Father's love.
That's right, and we get to continue to explain that. So vocations are doing really well.
So Father, I got to know, what are the numbers?
So, we had, I believe it was 19 men enter.
19 new applicants to the seminary. Fantastic. That's more than fantastic, Father.
It's grace.
And then what about this year? What's this year looking like? I know it's early, but
yeah, no, I think it'll be similar, because the Lord is calling people, and I'm just convinced when young men recognize this possibility and how attractive and extraordinary it is, I mean, it's not even a question. Your discernment is like, of course, I just want to follow the Lord.
Why wouldn't I do it?
Yes, give it a shot. And they do.
Listen, Father, this has been a lot of fun. It's been great having a chance to talk with Father Eric Cadin, Vocation Director of the Archdiocese of Boston, about his own relationship with the Lord, his love for the Lord, his own vocation and his work of recruiting vocations to the priesthood, of bringing men to know the love of the heart of Jesus Christ. Imagine what it would be like if we had more priests like Father Eric. That's why the Lord Jesus urges each of us to pray to the harvest master for more laborers for his harvest. So please join us in praying for shepherds after Jesus' heart, and encourage the young men who show signs of a vocation to ask Jesus in prayer whether Jesus might be calling them to serve his church, to serve the world as ordained Catholic priests. Please check back next week for an interview with another hardworking priest in the vineyard of the Lord. I'm Father Michael Duffy, the Diocese of Rockville Center, and I've been delighted to be your host today on the Shepherd Circle podcast. God bless you.
Thanks again for joining us today. For more information about how you can join us in supporting our work with clergy and religious, go to napa-institute.org. May God bless you this day and always.